Tongass National Forest. Tongass National Forest covers nearly 17 million acres across southeast Alaska, making it the largest national forest in the entire country. It stretches along a coastline carved by glaciers, where misty islands rise out of the sea and rain falls almost every day of the year. This is the largest intact temperate rainforest left on Earth, home to trees that have stood for more than 800 years. Bald eagles nest here in greater numbers than anywhere else in North America, and brown bears wade through icy streams each summer to catch salmon swimming upstream to spawn. The forest was expanded through a series of proclamations in the early 1900s, largely under President Theodore Roosevelt, who saw its timber and wildlife as resources worth protecting for generations. Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian peoples have lived among these trees and waterways for thousands of years, and their totem poles and traditions still shape the culture of the region today. Scientists often call Tongass one of the planet's most important carbon sinks, since its ancient trees and soggy peat soil trap enormous amounts of carbon that would otherwise warm the atmosphere. Standing among its towering spruce and hemlock trees, visitors often say it feels like stepping into a world untouched by time. Chugach National Forest sits along the southern coast of Alaska, wrapped around Prince William Sound and reaching toward the glaciers of the Kenai Peninsula. It is the second largest national forest in the United States, covering nearly 5.4 million acres of mountains, icefields, and dense spruce forest. Established in 1907, the forest was named after the Chugach people, an Alutiiq group who have fished and hunted in this region for centuries. Massive tidewater glaciers calve directly into the ocean here, sending chunks of blue ice crashing into the water with a sound that visitors describe as thunder. Moose, mountain goats, and Dall sheep roam its slopes, while humpback whales and sea otters fill the coastal waters below. In 1989, the Exxon Valdez oil spill devastated much of this coastline, killing hundreds of thousands of seabirds and thousands of marine mammals, and the forest's slow recovery became a turning point in how America thinks about protecting wild coastlines. Today, careful management and restoration have brought much of that wildlife back, proving that even after disaster, nature can find its way toward healing. White Mountain National Forest spreads across nearly 800,000 acres in New Hampshire and Maine, cradling some of the oldest mountains in North America. These peaks formed roughly 400 million years ago, long before the Rockies or even the Appalachians as we know them today, and centuries of erosion have worn them into rounded, weathered summits. The forest includes Mount Washington, famous for recording some of the strongest winds ever measured on the surface of the Earth, once clocked at 231 miles per hour. Established in 1918 after decades of destructive logging nearly stripped the region bare, the forest became a symbol of the conservation movement that swept through the eastern United States in the early 20th century. Fall visitors flock here by the millions to see maple, birch, and beech trees turn brilliant shades of red and orange, transforming entire mountainsides into a display that rivals any painting. Moose still wander through its valleys, and more than 1,200 miles of hiking trails wind through granite peaks and alpine meadows found nowhere else in New England. For many hikers on the Appalachian Trail, crossing the White Mountains is remembered as the most physically demanding stretch of the entire 2,190-mile journey. Superior National Forest. Superior National Forest stretches across northeastern Minnesota, bordering Canada along a wilderness of lakes so vast that some visitors compare it to a maze without an exit. Within its boundaries lies the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, home to more than 1,000 lakes connected by ancient portage trails once used by Ojibwe traders and French fur trappers. The forest was established in 1909, largely to protect its pine forests and waterways from unchecked logging that was already reshaping much of the upper Midwest. Gray wolves roam here in greater numbers than almost anywhere else in the lower 48 states, their howls carrying for miles across still water on quiet nights. Loons, with their haunting calls, are so closely tied to this landscape that Minnesota later chose them as the state bird. Because motorized boats and vehicles are banned across much of the wilderness area, paddlers experience the forest much the way travelers did 2 centuries ago, guided only by paddle, portage, and starlight. Each year, more than 150,000 people receive permits to canoe through this solitude, making it one of the most visited wilderness areas in the entire national forest system. Green Mountain National Forest covers roughly 400,000 acres running down the spine of Vermont, following the very mountain range that gave the state its name. The forest was established in 1932, during a period when much of Vermont's original forest cover had already been cleared for sheep farming, leaving hillsides bare and rivers prone to flooding. Decades of careful reforestation transformed the landscape, and today nearly 3/4 of Vermont is forested again, one of the most successful land recovery stories in American conservation history. Black bears, bobcats, and white-tailed deer move quietly through maple and birch stands that blaze with color every October, drawing leaf peepers from across the country. The Appalachian Trail and Vermont's own Long Trail, the oldest long-distance hiking trail in America, both wind through these mountains, sometimes sharing the very same footpath. Old stone walls still crisscross the forest floor, quiet reminders of farms that vanished generations ago and let the wilderness reclaim what people once cleared. Few places in the country show so clearly how a damaged landscape can return to life when given enough time and attention. El Yunque National Forest rises above the eastern hills of Puerto Rico, and it holds a distinction no other forest in the system can claim. It is the only tropical rainforest within the entire U.S. Forest Service. Spanish colonizers named it after a Taino word believed to mean sacred place, and the Taino people considered its cloud-wrapped peaks the dwelling place of a benevolent spirit called Yuqui. Rain falls here up to 200 inches a year, feeding rivers that tumble over waterfalls and keeping the forest a dense, dripping green year-round. President Theodore Roosevelt protected the land in 1903, making it one of the oldest forest reserves in the entire national forest system. The coqui, a tiny tree frog found almost nowhere else on Earth, fills the forest at night with a call so distinctive that it has become a symbol of Puerto Rican identity itself. In 2017, Hurricane Maria tore through the island with catastrophic force, stripping the canopy bare and reshaping trails that had stood for generations, yet within months the forest was already growing back, green shoots pushing through broken branches. That resilience has made El Yunque more than a forest. For many Puerto Ricans, it stands as a living symbol of survival itself. Ocala National Forest. Ocala National Forest spreads across central Florida, and it holds the title of the oldest national forest east of the Mississippi River, established in 1908. Beneath its sandy soil lies one of the largest concentrations of natural freshwater springs on Earth, crystal-clear pools that stay a constant 72 degrees no matter the season. Swimmers and snorkelers flock to springs like Alexander Springs and Juniper Springs, where water bubbles up from the Floridan aquifer after traveling underground for years, sometimes decades. The forest itself is unusual for its terrain, made up largely of sand pine scrub, a fragile and fire-dependent ecosystem that looks more like a desert than a typical southern woodland. Black bears, once nearly wiped out across Florida, have slowly returned to these woods, along with alligators that drift silently through the forest's spring-fed rivers. Because the sand pine scrub habitat depends on periodic wildfire to regenerate, forest managers regularly conduct controlled burns, a practice that mirrors the natural fire cycles indigenous peoples once managed themselves. Few visitors expect a Florida forest to feel this wild, but Ocala remains one of the last true wilderness landscapes left in a state reshaped by rapid development. Coconino National Forest. Coconino National Forest surrounds the red rock country of Sedona, Arizona, and stretches north toward the rim of the Grand Canyon, covering nearly 1.9 million acres of some of the most varied terrain in the entire national forest system. Within its boundaries sits the largest contiguous stand of ponderosa pine forest in the world, a green sea of trees that gives way suddenly to deep red sandstone canyons carved over millions of years. The forest holds 4 distinct life zones, meaning a single drive from its lowest desert scrub to its highest alpine peak mirrors an ecological journey similar to traveling from Mexico to Canada. Established in 1908, it was named for the Havasupai word believed to mean planting place, honoring the indigenous farming communities who cultivated corn and beans along its canyon floors for centuries. Oak Creek Canyon cuts through the forest in a dramatic gorge, its walls glowing orange and pink at sunset in a way that has drawn painters and photographers for more than a century. Humphreys Peak, the highest point in Arizona at over 12,600 feet, rises within the forest's boundaries, capped with snow well into late spring even as desert heat bakes the valley below. Few forests in America shift so dramatically from cactus to alpine tundra within a single afternoon's drive. Pisgah National Forest covers more than 500,000 acres across the mountains of western North Carolina, and it holds a special place in American conservation history as part of the very land that helped inspire the entire national forest system. In the late 1800s, timber baron George Vanderbilt hired forester Gifford Pinchot to manage this land using scientific forestry methods that were almost unheard of in the United States at the time. Pinchot later became the first chief of the U.S. Forest Service, and much of what he learned on Vanderbilt's land shaped how the entire agency would manage forests nationwide. Established in 1916, Pisgah is often called the cradle of forestry in America, since it was here that sustainable logging practices were first tested on a large scale. Waterfalls cascade through its steep hollows, including Looking Glass Falls, which drops 60 feet into a pool so clear that early settlers said it reflected light like a mirror on the mountainside. Black bears, salamanders, and more than 100 species of trees fill its cove forests, some of the most biologically diverse woodlands found anywhere in the temperate world. Every autumn, the Blue Ridge Parkway winding through Pisgah becomes one of the most photographed roads in the country, its overlooks packed with visitors chasing the turning leaves. Custer-Gallatin National Forest spans nearly 3 million acres across Montana and a sliver of South Dakota, bordering Yellowstone National Park on its northern edge and framing some of the most dramatic mountain scenery in the American West. Formed in 2014 when two older forests were combined, it stretches from the sacred granite spires of the Black Hills to the jagged, glacier-carved peaks of the Absaroka-Beartooth Wilderness. The Beartooth Highway, which cuts through part of the forest, climbs to nearly 11,000 feet and has been called one of the most beautiful drives in America, winding past alpine lakes still frozen well into July. Grizzly bears move freely between the forest and neighboring Yellowstone, making this one of the last places in the lower 48 states where the species still roams across a truly connected wild landscape. Bison, elk, and wolves also cross these boundaries, following migration routes that existed long before any human drew a line on a map. Within the Black Hills portion sits Bear Butte, a mountain considered sacred by the Cheyenne and Lakota peoples, still used today for prayer and ceremony much as it has been for centuries. Standing at the edge of the Beartooths, with jagged rock rising straight out of green valleys below, many visitors say it feels less like a forest and more like the edge of another world entirely. Shawnee National Forest. Shawnee National Forest stretches across the southern tip of Illinois, tucked between the Ohio and Mississippi rivers in a region locals call Little Egypt. Established in 1939 during the height of the Great Depression, the forest was created partly through New Deal programs that replanted trees on farmland ruined by decades of poor soil management and erosion. Its most famous feature, Garden of the Gods, is a maze of ancient sandstone formations shaped over 320 million years by wind, rain, and the slow retreat of ancient seas, leaving towering rock shapes with names like Camel Rock and Devil's Smokestack. Twice each year, the forest becomes a migration corridor for one of the largest gatherings of snakes in North America, when thousands of them cross a stretch of road near Larupine Hills, prompting rangers to close the road entirely to protect them. Bald eagles winter along the visitors expect to find canyons, waterfalls, and towering cliffs in Illinois, which is exactly why Shawnee continues to surprise everyone who finds it. Nearby rivers, and the rugged bluffs offer sweeping views across a landscape that looks strikingly different from the flat farmland most people picture when they think of Illinois. Because so much of the surrounding state had already been converted to agriculture, Shawnee stands today as a rare surviving pocket of true forest wilderness in one of the most heavily farmed regions in the country. Phew! Allegheny National Forest. Allegheny National Forest covers more than 500,000 acres in northwestern Pennsylvania, rolling across hills that once fueled one of the earliest oil booms in American history. Established in 1923, the forest grew from land left scarred by both aggressive logging and the oil drilling that swept through the region after Edwin Drake struck oil nearby in 1859, an event widely credited with launching the modern petroleum industry. Today, thick stands of black cherry, maple, and oak trees have reclaimed much of that damaged land, and the forest now produces some of the finest black cherry lumber in the world, prized by furniture makers for its rich color and grain. The Allegheny Reservoir, formed by the Kinzua Dam in the 1960s, created a 27-mile lake that flooded land once belonging to the Seneca Nation, a decision that displaced hundreds of Seneca families and remains a difficult chapter in the forest's history. Elk, reintroduced to Pennsylvania after being hunted to extinction in the state by the late 1800s, now roam parts of the forest in nearby Elk Range, their bugling calls echoing through the valleys each autumn. Dark skies over the forest have made it one of the best stargazing destinations in the eastern United States, largely free from the light pollution that blankets most of the northeastern seaboard. From industrial scars to protected wilderness, Allegheny's transformation shows how even land reshaped by heavy industry can be given the chance to heal.